Good morning, everyone. We're on time. We're very happy to see so many people here on a very early and relatively cold morning in New York, and a very busy week ahead for many. So welcome to this event on working together to improve statistics on corruption. We have a very interesting panel, which is going to be fact-based, and a lot of new initiatives that will be presented today. But first, I would really like to give the word to Merete Fjell-Brattensted, the ambassador here in New York to the Norwegian Permanent Mission to the UN, and who's been kind enough to host us this morning.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'll just speak without the microphone and hope that you can hear me. And if you can't, then you have to raise your hand. But I'll only speak for 2 minutes because my mission is simply to welcome you to the mission of Norway. Also making sure that you will get some breakfast if you would like. So please help yourselves to something to eat, something to drink, coffee, tea. Now, I think you are in for a bit of a treat this morning. The reason I'm saying that is that when we work on other development questions, like I'm doing at the moment, I'm working a lot on the question of financing for development, financing the SDGs that we know are seriously off track. We know, for example, that there's an estimate saying that to finance the SDGs, we need an average of at least 4.3 trillion per year from now until 2030. At the same time, there is statistics that show that the equivalent of 25% of this is lost to the developing economy through corruption every year. So if we were able to really fight corruption, we could bring in also a lot of finance for development. In order to fight corruption, we need data, we need statistics, we need to know the facts, which we do, I think, in every walk of life if we want to give policy advice to our governments. But that's why it's so important that you do meet, that you do exchange both ideas and best practices, and learn and talk about how can we come together around the facts, because the world is full of fake news, and hopefully having some of the facts clearer and having the statistics that we need in order to base our policy will only be useful for us all. So I wish you a very productive morning. I can't be here because I have to go back and continue working on financing for development. But hopefully someone will tell me what you talked about. But I give it back to you, Irene, and you are in a very safe hands. So enjoy the morning and have a great day. Thank you so much.
I'm going to maybe then just follow up and try to speak without the microphone. It's a bit easier. So, Norway is one of the co-organizers of this event. The other co-organizer is from UNODC, and we're very happy to have Angela May here today. Also co-organized by UNSC56 division, and we have several colleagues representing UNSC here in the meeting. Also, the National Institute of Statistics and Geography of Mexico. But we have an even fuller panel, and we will hear from all of these speakers in due time. It was a good segue for us to that Merete also mentioned the financing for development. We've talked about it a lot in the last couple of days, and even on the Friday seminar that some of you attended. It's creating or generating revenues for development is also about reducing losses. And if we want to know where the losses come from, we need to be country specific. We need that knowledge, and I'm so impressed at the work that the UNSC and the UNODC have been working on these efforts. So I'm going to give the floor now first to Angela May for a presentation of where we are in the process. And I wonder if I should probably move out of the way so that you can see. Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen above me, or should I move out? Okay, okay. If you need to see more, just let me know.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And good morning to everyone. Thank you for also, give a space for the Statistical Commission on measuring corruption, and also to highlight how we are working together among statisticians. And the beauty of working together with UNSD is that we really bring two communities together. The statistician, the National Statistical Offices, and from the UNODC, in the community of those that work on anti-corruption measurement. And I always say Norway is really an example because you cover both statistics and corruption. And I thought that's brilliant because if you think about the statistics helps really even just to disseminate and to have statistics, help in transparency. And the governance. So that's really a combination that I have not seen in other countries, but really great. And it's also great because I think one other point that I want to make and tell you what we have been doing to address it is that corruption statistics is very good. And I have to say that I've been working in all my career with the UN on development, SDG, etc. And for me, corruption is one of the areas where statistics is most underdeveloped. Which is, interesting because if you ask countries, there are many polls that you see around the world, and if you ask the citizens, what is your main concern? And usually corruption is not among the first five, among the first 10. So this is something that, citizens and government cares. So why we have not developed as a statistical community yet really system that can really help to measure it. So what have we done? How do I go to the next one? This one. Yes. So, okay, we have said that, first of all, it's important also for statisticians to understand why we need to. And the ambassador mentioned also in the context of financing for development. But of course, there is also an all domestic agenda. I would say virtually all countries in the world has an anti-corruption agency, sometimes more than one. And so there are a lot of efforts that are gone into fighting corruption, but hardly any country can say, are efforts going in the right direction or not? Hardly we can really answer the question, do we have today more or less corruption than yesterday? And so how do we know that what we have been doing at all levels, national, international, is really having an impact? So we are really missing that, understanding. But also, it's a realization that corruption is a complex. And many of you may be familiar with Transparency International Index. And this is what the academic community often use, etc. And but it's an index that is based on perception most of the time. And I make a point on how perception, is important to understand what perception. We have to be clear that perception is different than experience. And so whether an index can give a flavor, that's really helpful to answer that question. Are we doing better today than yesterday? But it's also to understand corruption can manifest in different ways. So can we understand in what ways that are more prevalent in certain countries and others, so that again we can address it. But why? We don't have efforts on measuring corruption. Again, I mentioned earlier, it's a complex. So it's not something that is easy, and as a statistician, sometimes we love complex measures. But it's not something that is unidimensional. That then you have the definition, etc., and you try to measure it. So that is one of the challenges. And that means that there could be a lot of data and sources that can inform corruption. It's not just one way and say, okay, I do a survey, done, now I know, and because again, there is that different manifestation. But also, there is also lack of resources, and we are discussing all of this week on how, all resources for development are shrinking, where they should be increased if we want to achieve SDGs. And also, we see also that affecting data and statistics. Sometimes it's also lack of political will. And so how do we address all of this? Of course, each of the challenge should be addressed by different stakeholders. What we can address as community is more the technical challenge. How can we deal as a statistician on dealing with this multiplicity of sources and complexity of measurement corruption? So what we have done so far, one is, we have two SDG indicators on corruption, and they focus on bribery. So, and it's like the percentage of indicators is the percentage of the people that have to pay a bribe to receive a public service, or the percentage of business. These are the two indicators. And for this, we have invested a lot as UNODC to really support countries to implement surveys. This is clearly, again, statistician, you will know, that's something that you can collect through population or business survey. You go and ask, factory of questions, and then we get to the result. And globally, we can have, and there are some surveys, some national statistical offices, we will hear from the experience of some national statistical offices, but there are still a lot of surveys that are carried out to measure bribery outside of official statistics. So how can we help statistical offices to really, implement corruption survey, or to use existing survey to, to have some questions that can have a direct experience, to understand the direct experience of citizens in corruption. And this, once we have this, we can quickly say, well, we know that we're doing better or worse. But it's not enough. And because, as I said, the corruption is much more beyond bribery. And so what we have done is to say, okay, we need to go beyond bribery. So we need to build a framework, a statistical framework that can, map all of that complexity of the different type of corruption, the different sources, and the different measures that we could have. And we had a statistical commission in 2023 that approved a statistical framework. And now, briefly, I want to tell you what is this framework. And so, among statistician is basically is a list of indicators. But it's not just a flat list of indicators, and it's very important to understand it, because what the framework deals is to have the different dimensions of corruption that are defined by the convention. We have an international convention against corruption, and virtually almost all countries in the world are parties to this convention. And so this convention defines elements that every party should criminalize: bribery, but also illicit enrichment or money laundering into corruption. But there are also measures in the convention that talks about preventing measures, like hiring based on merit, hiring public service based on merit, or defining yes. Okay. So the convention says, give us the element to say what we should measure. And these elements are very, in a way, unidimensional, if you want, for us statisticians. But how do we measure each of these? And for each of these, ideally, again, as a statistician, we love direct measures. And direct measures are the ones that we say, okay, we are measuring, educational attainment. We know. And again, it's those measures that can tell us whether they're doing better or not. The issue with corruption is that in many of the elements that we have on corruption, it's difficult to find direct measures. And because either it's very expensive, or it's actually technically very difficult. So what the framework does is also to capture the issues that, by the way, now countries are measuring. Maybe not through national statistical offices or official statistics, but across the government. And then one is perception. And I think it's important to recognize what people perceive, as long as we understand we are talking about perception. But also to measure the risk. And the risk is in terms of opportunities that there are for corruptive behaviors, or issues that can reduce the corruption. I'll give you an example, the procurement. Well, when on corruption, the community of corruption discuss a lot about procurement. And so having public tenders for procurement clearly reduce the risk. So it's one of the elements that we can measure and say how many government procurement are done through a tender. That's a classical indicator. Does this measure corruption? Not per se. It measures the risk. So it's an important element for understanding corruption, but again, we have to put it in the framework as a risk to understand that we're measuring the risk and not the outcome. And the same is for responses. A lot of countries measure corruption just through what we would say responses. Like how many people have been arrested on the charges of corruption, how many are prosecuted. These are important elements, but do we measure the corruption? No, because do we want to have more people to be arrested or less? Is it a sign of progress to have more people in prison for corruption or less? It depends. If we have a lot of corruption, it's better to have more people in prison. But if we have less corruption, then we would like to have less people in prison. So here again, the value of the framework, and I have almost done, is it's not just the list of indicators that can be used by countries to really, pick. It's like a menu that statistical offices can use together with anti-corruption agencies to construct its own national framework. The important thing that the framework help the countries and to lead is to have this dimension and to understand that as a country is important to cover all of this, because if it's only risk is covered, then we don't really understand corruption. Or if only the responses to corruption is measured, then we don't understand corruption. I had an example to show, but I'm sure that my colleagues will give. And that's I just wanted to conclude to say that really hope and together that's what we are doing is to bring these two community of statisticians and anti-corruption agencies to really see how together every country can construct its own framework that they can use to answer that question. As a country, are we doing better or worse on corruption? Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This gave a very good framework for the rest of the panel, and I'm happy to say that we'll now have two country experiences that we will first go to Mexico for the Mexican experience on corruption statistics, and we're happy to welcome Mr. Adrian Franco from Cleveland.
Thank you very much. I will use the microphone. Sorry about my voice, but I got a cold, so it's much better if I use the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank to Norway Permanent Mission for hosting this event. Of course, to Toriel Pedersen, that is our moderator. Angela, Lucy, Viveke, all of you, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Good morning, everyone. Of course, Angela has said a lot of things about what is the international framework in order to measuring corruption. For us, for every country, as a statistician, it is very important to notice that corruption has been a very important topic during the last 25 years. If you remember, before 25 years, there were no aware or measuring of corruption. It started very little by little in order to have some measures of corruption. But of course, as the ambassador already said, corruption is part of the very, very comprehensive agenda of development. in all our countries, there are some arguments, there are some stories, there are some frameworks, there are some institutions, there are some laws related to corruption. For example, the ambassador also said that about the 25% of the funds in order to develop countries or to develop any part of the countries were lost for corruption. Let me tell you that in the 80s in Mexico, it is said, some estimations, that 98% of total fundings were lost because of corruption in the south part of the country. So it means that from every peso, 98 cents were lost in the way to because of corruption. So of course, for us, it's so important. Angela just said, as everybody of you already know, that we have two very important indicators in the SDG agenda. But the central issue here is that even when we have two very important indicators, our goal is not just to fulfill indicators. Our goal is to have a very comprehensive understanding of what corruption means in the context of the countries. Of course, it's important to fulfill and to prepare, to give elements and to create instruments in order to fulfill indicators. It's okay, because in that way, this very small part, as Angela said, of bribery, we can know if we are doing well or not. But this is a very small part of the story. That's why this is also very important, and Angela just explained it. The framework, the statistical framework for measuring corruption that we present, well, Angela, UNODC presented 2 years ago here in the Statistical Commission. We supported together with UNODC the presentation of one report in the previous years on this. So for us, it's also important, this topic. And I repeat, this is part of a more general. Well, going to the case of Mexico, let me tell you that we have national system of this. We are part of the national statistical system, and this is very important because, as Ambassador and everyone here has said, this side event is entitled "How we can cooperate and how we can coordinate in order to reduce or to measure at least corruption." In the case of Mexico, we have this national statistical system, and we have a very specific part of the statistical system related to governance, crime, and justice statistics. And we have been working on this in the last 15 years. And of course, our main sources of data in order to measure corruption specifically, we have a lot of surveys, a lot of censuses of government, where we go to the government institutions and we ask several things, and we are going to deep in this, and administrative records. Even when, for example, if you look for if you want to track corruption in administrative records, of course, it's almost impossible. Nobody received a receipt of because they made a corruption act, or nobody is leaving some traces in the administrative records regarding to corruption. But we can find, for example, prosecution process. We can find judicial processes and people who is in jail because of this. As Angela said also, it is not important, at least in the measurement, to know that we have a lot of people inside prison because of corruption. This is not a right measure, but of course we have administrative records. In the case of Mexico, we do statistics on 5 categories. First, we work a lot on perceptions. That is very important. Sometimes for people who hear about perceptions on some issues or phenomena like corruption or crime, because of the surveys or that comes from surveys, they say, well, it's just perception. But let me tell you that perceptions dealing with corruption and crime, there are 2 very hard indicators. Because governments could do a lot of investment, change a lot of laws, establishing a lot of organizations, and people perceive almost the same. So it's a very, very hard indicator, but when you do very well. It is not a question of if we have the magic number, for example, certain indicator like Transparency International is a magic number. that is a mix of several studies. And they say, well, you, as a country, you have 9.6 or 3.2. Well, the main question is, what I can do with that number? Can I change something in order to change the number? The answer is no, because it's an addition of several studies. So, but when we do a survey, very methodologically very strong, trying to develop, to reveal the perception of population, it is a very, very important tool. Second one, the same in importance, experience of corruption. So we have perceptions and also direct experiences of corruption, that we call victimization. Corruption risk in public institutions is a very, very important. We have to monitor the institutional capabilities in governments. In the case of Mexico, we have 3 levels of government: federal, state level, and municipal. And imagine a structure where we have more than 2,500 local governments. So each of them are independent. So it's really quite complicated, but we have to monitor these kind of things in order to measure the institutional capabilities in order to deal with a corruption risk. Also, institutional capabilities and control of corruption, and finally, legal sanctions in the judicial and the prosecution system. As you see in the slide, in order to fulfill the statistical framework, we see perceptions, experiences, corruption risk management, internal control, and all the fields that we fulfill with our instrument. Regarding to individuals, to economic units, we have a specialized survey related to economic unit businesses, and also public organizations where we collect the administrative records. But individuals and households and people, we have surveys. And in the other side, in the right side of the slide, you see the acronyms of different surveys. Don't worry about it. It's acronyms. It's, for example, a governmental quality survey, a civic culture survey, a national survey related to urban security, or the national victimization survey for enterprises, or national victimization survey for people, or a national survey related to the risk and regulation in private enterprises, and so on. So we have different instruments in order to collect, the data. So, and this is the name of the several instruments. And regarding the governments, of course, we collect every year all the data for the governments, and of course the services. Some of them are annual, and some of them biennial. So let's see, for example, of course, you can imagine that we have lots of information. Let's just see 2 or 3 slides. For example, when we ask about to the people, nationwide, and for a state, we have 32 states, the perception of frequency of corruption and trust in institutions, for example. The basic rule is the more corruption are perceived in an institution, the less trust we have in an institution. And for example, police, 86% of population, they perceive corruption, very frequent corruption in police. Of course, we don't trust police. But in the other side, for example, relatives, neighborhoods, co-workers, public and elementary schools, autonomous agencies, Navy and Army, NGOs, and so on. So you see, we asked about the perception of frequency of corruption in several institutions. Why we do this? Because we would like to have several responses to the whys. Why, where, when, how. It is about the dimensions of corruption. For example, social perception about the frequency of corruption in the states, for example. It has been a decrease in the perception, yes, it has been a decrease, and maybe it is because we changed government between 2017 and 2018, we changed government, so there is an expectation of reducing the corruption in the country, but this is just about perception. But if we move from perception to experiences, you see, for example, here 4 circles. In the first circles in the left side, for example, this is 60% of the people believes that they have heard about corruption in the procedures that they carry out. 60%. Remember that we comes from an 80% of total perception of corruption. So in the procedure that they do or the interaction that they have with the government, 60% they said, well, I believe they are it is corruption. 45% of the users, direct users, they know or they know somebody who said, well, there is a lot of corruption in the procedures that you are doing with the government, the interactions that you have with the government. And when we talk about direct experience of corruption, the question is, do you were victim of corruption? And we define corruption as same as indicator of the SDG, it is 14%. So we have to explore all the change from the experience, from the perception to experiences. For example, two very clear indicators, very important. Prevalence rate, it means the percentage of population that were direct victim of corruption. You see here again, the 14%, and in the right side, the incident rate. It is the number of acts of corruption per population. So you see all of the two indicators are decreasing. And finally, because for us it's very important to produce statistics in order to support public policies in federal level and state level. So for us, it's very important not just to say, well, the perception of corruption or the general victimization. We have to explore every procedure, every contact that we, as citizens, we have with several institutions. For example, contact with public security authorities is 60% of people who were in contact with public security were victims at least of one act of corruption. This is a problem. This is a central problem. For example, procedure to open a business, property-related permits, and those. Yeah. That's it. Well, thank you very much.
Very rich, rich presentation with a lot of examples. There will be a section for question and answers when we finish the presentations. Now I want to hand the floor to give the Italian experience of corruption statistics. Mrs. Maria Giuseppe Monaco. Okay. We'll give you that.
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for, I don't know, you are better. Okay. First of all, thank you very much about this really important invitation, also the really important side event. What about Italy? So I will not present you data, but more the steps that we made during 10 years now, because we started with not the SDGs included, but before, because there was this Stiglitz and Peterson Commission on well-being, and Italy started to work on the well-being from different point of view, and when I was there, we decided to speak also about, there is a domain dedicated to safety, a chapter dedicated to safety. And one of these key issues were corruption. But we said, but we don't have any corruption. So we started to plan to have a survey. So this is the reason for which we started to, we wanted to study corruption, and we put a module on corruption in our victimization survey. It was in 2015, 17, it was repeated in 2023. Then there were the SDGs goals for the agenda. And okay, I don't show you what we have already mentioned from Angela and from Aria. And what is also our contribution was that we said, yes, we want to participate to the design of the manual and also contribute to this. Then there is another kind of steps that were carried out at political level. What is the reason? the Ministry of Foreign Office was very, very interested to corruption because it's true that the CPI index puts Italy in a very low rank, but again, this is a perception and not really a direct measure. And it's true that there is this Trocadero paradox for which you more you speak about corruption, you more feel that your country is corrupted, more law you do, more there is an issues in the media, more is the perception of corruption is very high. So we started to work together. Is that in the Ministry of Foreign Office? There was also established an interministerial working group, and the idea was corruption measurement is very important. So there was the G7 workshop dedicated to corruption, and then the adoption of a resolution with the UNCAC in 2019, and then in G20, it was in 2021, the focus on corruption for the Italian presidency. What to say? Obviously, our contribution for the UNCAC at the conference was to say that it is very, very important to speak about experience-based data. And there is, if you look, a lot of information about the request of having a broad range of data sources. I mean, it's experience-based data from household and business service, like SDGs already have described, indicators of risk and vulnerabilities. So the idea is go towards a systems of statistics. It is very, very important. Obviously, Angela before said, the statistical framework is very huge and is very comprehensive. It speaks of a lot of different kinds of measures. But at least to try to have this idea, like a framework that we need to approach corruption in different kinds of ways. What we did in the G20 experience is that with the Minister of Foreign Office, ANAC, it is the agency, the government agency against corruption. It's an independent agency, so it is not a government that is a part of the money. It's an independent agency to fight corruption. It is ANAC. And we work also with DOCS and UNSC. We carried out an inventory of data collections in G20 countries. You trying to understand what there is and what there isn't about the response state indicators, prosecutions, proceedings, convictions, but also the survey, but also the risk indicators about the public procurement. So which countries have something or not, and then we delivered a compendium of good practices that is available if you want to see with the pros and cons of different situations over the countries. Just to have an overview, but also to say what is the best of the countries. Obviously, Mexico had so many interesting sources of data. And what was also important in our exercise was that at the beginning there was already the SCCS, the classification for of crimes, the international classification, that give us the definition of some kind of corruption and so on. Then there was the statistical framework to measure corruption. And the keywords were complexity, as already Angela said, the complexity of the topic, complexity in the measurement, and the importance to give objectivity to the measurement. So we can say that it is a complexity of indicators, definition, methodological competencies, attention to harmonization, opportunity to compare between countries and inside countries, and a multi-actor system, political willingness, awareness, and so on. So more than indicators, which is a way to reach them? Okay, there are direct and indirect measures, the contrast indicators. In Italy, there was been, okay, it depends from the government, but in the past there was a very strong effort to have a very good laws to combat, to fight against corruption. So we are, I think, much more good about the Eure and also a lot of de facto indicators. Also risk. And there are something about a different kind of corruptions that are criminalized in UNCRAC. And also we have something about the preventive measure and the transparency and about international cooperation. So much more concretely, what you have in Italy, we have some data about the direct experience about bribery that is collected in our victimization survey on household. But there are also some data about the work side, but this is not a service on business. Data on perception inside this module, data on sense of civic duty, data on trust in institutions. These are data collected in a multi-purpose surveys or other kind of surveys. There was a survey on businesses and relationship with the public administration, data on investigations and perpetrators, judicial data on convictions and prisoners, information on asset recovery and beneficial ownership, public procurement data. This is a very good data set. Before there was an understanding, an agreement between ISTAT and ANAC, and we studied the performance of businesses that win the public procurement and other risk indicators like transparency and trading. So the idea is that it is very important to have a data-driven approach to evaluate the effectiveness of the policies, okay? And but also at the same time to plan new preventive measures, but also repressive policies. ANAC is doing a very, very interesting project. They have this measuring the risk of corruption at territorial level and promoting transparency. It is a very huge dashboard full of indicators at the territorial level. This is very good. They have, this is nice because it is a dedicated tool on the web that is very good for, is easy to be used from different stakeholders, from citizens to media and also experts. And it has a very territorial level, it's not very good. And it's based on also the public procurement data. So it is possible to analyze red flags and a lot of information that can be critical, I don't know if I can say, about the public procurement and different kind of institutions that use and not use, and so on. What about the ISTAT indicators from the survey? We have indicators on direct experience, prevalence rate, incidence rate, multi-sector victimization survey. This is very important because we know that when someone is, okay, I say victims of a kind of corruption, it happens not one time, but many times in different kind of sectors, and it is there is the peak of the situation of no reporting, and they feel that it is dangerous to report, and they feel that it is corruption is something that is inevitable, something that you can do anything. So this is a group of population, very small, but very, very involved in the dynamic of population. Then we have indicators about the dynamic, but also the utility of corruption. It was useful, yes, no, why? And then indicators on indirect influence. That means, do you know someone in your family and your friends that have experienced that correction. So it is not really direct, but not perception. It is something concrete. Then equities, assisting to exchange into your place of office, both by experience, if they suffer or not, the perception about the diffusion between professionals and entrepreneurs. And obviously the attention is on petty corruption and the goals. And for planning the survey, we used a lot of focus group interviews with the key professionals that are experts. Just journalists, academics, politicians, but also representative of workers. We did also cognitive test. We asked the contribution of the UNSC and the World Bank. And we asked about direct corruption on 8 kind of different sectors: health, education, work, public office, public utilities, police and law enforcement, justice, and social beneficiary. Social beneficiaries is the only issues, the only topic where was increased in the last 3 years, the corruption, because the other were everything was. So in June 2024, we launched the conference where we presented the data and Anna presented the data. It was Angela presented the statistical framework, and it was the starting point, because we put together the Minister of Interior, Minister of Justice, Economy and Finance, Foreign Office, National School of Public Administration, because they have a lot of information about the training, about public hiring or something. And so this is obviously only the starting point to plan the roadmap. But we are really far from the work of the discourse.
Thank you very much. Another very rich presentation. Now we're a little bit over this. So we will now hear from Vibeke and Sarah. Vibeke from UNSC and Sarah from the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics on the development of a practical guidance to measure corruption. So picture we have time for questions and answers. I think that's a really important part of this meeting. But
so we're just about to start, so I think we will not have that much to share. So sure. But first of all, as Angela said, this is really started off as a collaboration between UNODC, also initiated by NORAD. Right? So UNSC, at least to my knowledge, hasn't been an active player in the development of the measure or the guidance. But with the team that I have been managing, that many of you also are linking up with the debate now, we typically support development of practical guidance that help you practically work on how to implement recommendations that come out of the Statistical Commission. So when we had these discussions, we said this could be something that fits very well in the context of Data for Now, and it fits very well in the context of what UNODC was sharing, that there are a lot of anti-corruption agencies that really have a demand for better data and statistics, but they don't know how to, and they really are in need of working with you as statistics officers to figure out the ways to do it practically. We know that the statistical framework to measure corruption is complicated in the sense that it has a lot of indicators. And therefore, as it also says in that document, there's not necessarily the expectation that we should measure all of it, but we need to have a process at national level to define and specify what are the priorities. And that also takes collaboration between you and the corruption agencies, other key users. And we know that this is something that also is challenging to many countries to do that in a good way. And we thought that should be part of practical guidance. How do we do this? Right? So based on initial discussions, we have just hired a consultant that will support the development of a practical guidance to measure corruption that will provide more practical information linked to the statistical framework to measure corruption. And the guidance that we are giving the consultant is that he should elaborate on 9 practical steps listed in the framework to kind of explain better what they are, how to work on them, how to use them. There should also be a discussion on different potential data sources. We have some discussion from Mexico and Italy, but we also know that there is a lot going on in terms of use of administrative data. There may be opportunities when it comes to use of citizen data, and there may also be opportunities when it comes to use of innovative methods. As an example, I think Saudi Arabia is exploring the use of natural language processing, and that may be something that could be relevant in some of your countries as well. Further, the guidance is also meant to have a discussion around different data quality, roles of the parties, how you together set this priorities, how you bring it to other actors, how you also can make sure that you get access to the different data sources that are needed, what could be practical ways, and also looking in that context on data integration, right? Because for some of these indicators, you may have to look at different data and bring them together. And that is not always easy when your data are not compatible to begin with. I know that there's also work going on at UNODC when it comes to metadata, so that will also be added to guidance. Because we know that you all are saying we want to learn of experiences of others, and because we also want to be guided by practical experiences we're currently exchanging with the two countries, that will follow the work of the consultant, and the consultant will follow the work of the countries, so that we see in practice what the challenges are, so that we can highlight them in the guidance as we move forward. And the first country that is confirmed is Kenya. There was a request from the Kenyan Anti-Corruption Agency to UNODC. We contacted the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics to see if they would be interested to be one of the countries to test it out, be part of the process now when we work on the guidance. And we just had confirmation very recently by a colleague of Sarah Omache here. We have conversations with a couple of other countries too, but if you find this very interesting, especially those of you who are here who are parts of Data for Now, you can reach out to us and we would be happy to discuss it and also engage with UNODC, see if the Anti-Corruption Agency or similar agencies would be interested as well. So I think I'll stop here and I'll hand over to you, Sarah. And I know you have slides, so I'll teach to find them.
Becca, I said, bringing the perspective of UNSC, I'm thinking, I said, oh, he's making it so much better. So it's really the value of bringing different perspective and making things. It's a lot more enrichment.
Yeah. But so after we hear from Sarah, then we'll open up for questions. So please prepare your questions and comments.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. I have a healing code. Yeah, Rebecca has mentioned that we are willing to work with UNST so that we can at least have this a good framework of measuring corruption statistics. But I'm going to do a brief presentation on how it looks, the status of how we handle corruption statistics in Kenya. So what you see on the screen is the sources of data we have for corruption statistics for our regular reports. So it's the usual traditional sources, that is from administrative data, from surveys, from censuses, and from citizen-generated data. Earlier on, as I was listening to the presenters, the administrative data is the data that we always know. The number of cases reported on corruption, how many cases have been handled, how many are pending, how many are confirmed, is there evidence for this and that? Yeah, that is, and it might not be the best way of measuring corruption, because we want to see if more cases are reported, someone is doing something. But also that means that there's more corruption. Yeah. So that is the usual way of measuring corruption or reporting on corruption. For the surveys is putting the modules in the various surveys and asking about, did you receive a bribe? Were you told to pay something for a public service that should be free? Same applies to the censuses. But I'd also like to mention that CGD is an important way of measuring corruption. There are some civil society organizations operating in Kenya that are very keen on measuring corruption. But also we do not want to ignore the fact that we need to check the quality of the data of CGD always to ensure that it's credible. For instance, there's one civil society organization, it's called the National Taxpayers Association, which looks at the projects that are the members of parliament or the representatives of the people in parliament, the money that is allocated to them vis-a-vis the projects that they have implemented. When they do the submissions, they look at these submissions and look for independent people to value these projects and look at the differences or the discrepancies in costs for these projects. So that is very important source of data. Of course, bigger discrepancies mean that most of the money has been misappropriated. And this data usually gives a lot of uproar in the country when it comes out, because most of the people overvalue or overspend on some of these projects. So CGD is one way of getting this corruption data. So usually we present our data on corruption in an annual report called the Economic Survey. There's a whole chapter called Governance Statistics, which also includes data on corruption. We also have a number of tables, more detailed tables in our annual statistical abstract. There's a Kenya Corruption Survey. This is done by the Corruption Authority, which is the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Of course, they are the ones who wrote to UNODC requesting for that support. We also report on SDG 16, that is 16.1 and 16.5. This is 16.5. Yes. Yeah. So that is how, those are some of the indicators we report on corruption. This is what I was mentioning earlier. The number of reports handled, like the number of reports on corruption handled, the action taken by the ENCC, that is our anti-corruption body. There's the value of public assets traced, recovered, and loss averted by Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. So these are like their administrative records of that commission. We always request that data from them. We have a working agreement for them to submit the information as admin data. There's also reports forwarded to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and action taken. This is after they have confirmed that there's something to be done, like there's a discrepancy or there's possible corruption in a case. The bravery, this is mostly captured in surveys, like the prevalence of bribery. How often do people do bribe? The impact of bribe payments, reasons why the bribe was paid, and satisfaction of services after paying bribes. Actually, in the previous household budget survey, I think in other countries they call it the living standards measurement. We had a whole module asking about the formal and informal payments for people to seek justice. Some people were paying bribes and informal payments for them to seek or get justice in cases where they had grievances or when they were seeking a public service, which should be ideally free. So it was also a way of measuring corruption, but it was from the NSO side rather than from the ENCC side. There's also indicator on perception of corruption, the causes and impact of corruption, prevalence of corruption and unethical practices, attitudes on corruption and institutions most prone to corruption. This is mostly handled by the authority, the commission. It's a constitutional body. Mostly they do it on regular basis to get the perception of corruption. I don't know how to move to the next slide. Yeah, we have an important collaboration. What thrives in Kenya mostly is the relationship the NSO has with most of the government agencies, that is the ministries, the departments, the agencies, including constitutional bodies, because they freely share this information, including with the EACC, especially on the governance, peace and security statistics. We have a working group, just like in many sectoral areas or thematic areas, all the way from trade statistics, national accounts, gender statistics, health, education. We have technical working groups and we have a special one on governance, peace and security statistics as part of one of the coordination mechanisms of the National Statistical System, where they look at the data on a quarterly basis, harmonize the data, discrepancies between different institutions, agree on definition. So EACC is one key member of that technical working committee. The secretariat is from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. So the collaboration started in 2020, and I think in the recent discussions that I'm privy to, the anti-corruption are trying to, I think based on this discussion, they want to strengthen the collaboration so that we can improve the way we measure corruption statistics. Yeah, we're exploring using CGD, as I mentioned earlier, but there's always a caveat on CGD. We have to check the quality. I feel like they have the real thing, the real information on corruption. Like this is happening, 47 billion shillings is being misappropriated by the Constituency Development Fund. Yeah, that is like we've really measured that corruption and we know we've quantified it and we know where it is happening. But we need to verify in a way that it's the quality of the data has to be verified. In that last part. Yeah, conclusion. Yeah, we have interest because there's a gap. We also want to look at the corruption and understand the real way it is happening, how it is happening, how much of it is happening, and if the interventions that are happening over time are improving or not. And I believe that is why EACC wrote to UNODC for that particular support. We look forward to working with UNST and UNODC on this one. Thank you.
Great, thank you very, very much. We now have a few minutes to take questions or comments. And because we have limited time, you can just introduce yourself, where you're coming from, and keep your questions be short so we can have time for it.
Good morning. Thank you for an excellent panel. Rosemary Barbary, Professor of Criminal Justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I'm wondering, of the indicators that you're presenting, which do you think will likely to result in actually producing data that is comparable? Which do you think will be most successful in most countries and maybe producing comparable data?
I think if we take a couple more.
Yeah, I think the question on comparability is taken. I wanted also to ask that. The other question I have is I want to just like, quite interesting and also complicated indicators. How do you verify that? How do you quantify that? Maybe just for information sharing, it does not really necessary to just to anyone who would like to come in. Also, like the presenter said, it's quite a bit tricky, but from the statistics office, from whatever, we need to ensure that it's quality data. Whatever.
Okay. If there are no other questions, then we have time to also get answers for the questions. I think, but I'd also like to add one question from my side. Now, how here we're in a room with like-minded, wanting to find the information and solutions. So maybe we can also reflect for us a little bit. What is the obstacles that you're facing when you're trying to move forward on these things? Maybe we'll just go this way. Okay. So Maria, do you have any of these questions you would like to answer?
About the data comparability, I think that it is very, it's difficult, obviously. So it's not an easy issue. Perhaps, so I think that this is a very linked to the quality of the data and the other kind of problematic. Obviously, we need to have a very good definition that is the same definition. And then we can speak about harmonization, not really standardization. We can, for the direct survey, for instance, we have the idea of that it is important to define the questions that are event-based questions. The event-based questions can be the same for each campus. And they can give, if they give different results, obviously, is within the issues to be faced, to be addressed. And also the methodology is very important, the attention to quality. So, but this is also inside the one country, the same countries, because for instance, when we saw that we have very different data from one survey to the other, from one wave to the other, the question is it something that is also linked to the quality of the data collection, or it's really something that has been changed over the years? Or there is also the pandemic period in the middle. So there are also some problems of remembering. So something, and the framework is different. So, and it was not easy to. So there are a lot of caveats when you analyze data. Also, even if you start from the same situation. The other problem about the quality is that we need a lot of investment. I think that is, and that in some institutions, it is not easy to speak about data. So also the awareness
Now pass to Angela. If you want to complement or disagree
Yeah.
with any of the, answers, 1 minute.
Yeah, to answer the question on what indicators do you compare, the one that we have, because has been more advanced, is Brighton. And that's, but there are others, like proportion of public sector employees that have been hired through a public process. So there are many others. I'm thinking about the survey and administrative data. So there are where we can be. The obstacles, I think I would say there are, one is a culture. Sometimes among anti-corruption agencies, there is not a statistical culture. And so how to kind of help the user side, if you want to understand, because when I started to get into the community of corruption, you hear, anti-corruption agencies say, we have a survey on corruption. I say, oh, wow, fantastic. Then you realize that it's a survey among themselves. And, and we use this for, and so it just to have, so I would say something that, and in that sense, if I may say, something that we should work more also from the UNTAC side, to develop that culture of really what it means and how to use the data.
Thank you. Vivek and Sarah, 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I think based on my kind of entry point, I think what is also very important at this point is that each country decides on the priorities for themselves. That is, of course, coming at the cost of comparability globally, but I think a lot of this is happening at national level and there needs to be follow-up at national level. And I think what we really can focus on in that context is to ensure that there is metadata, so that even though you can't necessarily directly compare, and practically work, try and say, this is the context in this country and this is the context in that was something I just wanted to add my side.
I feel like maybe it's this time if we have to make sure we're talking to all agree with everyone. Government, this what we are, this is how we are looking at it.
Thank you. I think we have to, it's a very short question, and that Andrea can answer.
Okay, so we can thinking about developing a policy against corruption, a best practice. You can think about this
The policy.
policy that we have the best practice.
So I'm going to give the floor to Adrian to answer the questions that you feel like. You feel like a politician and answer the questions you feel like. And give us, as a co-organizer of this event, also if you have some concluding remarks, also.
Thank you very much, Torelli. About comparability and the challenges, of course, when we think about corruption, we have to think, of course, as many other indicators, compare with somebody at the some point. I mean, we have to keep comparability inside the country, domestic, and also internationally thinking. So that's why we have an international framework for measuring corruption. And that's why, of course, the obvious answer to this is that we have two SDGs that are very comparable. But as Angela said, we have a lot of indicators that are comparable in across the country. So it is important. And about the challenges, of course, culture, about how governments, about how society see the corruption issues. And also, I could say, we have a lot of challenges about resources. Not just because to produce very high quality statistics is expensive, but also because we have to think about institutional capabilities of national statistical offices. This is so important because sometimes maybe we have the money, but we don't have capability, or the other way. So this is very, very important to a combination of these two. And as a policy, of course, there are in the countries, it is very common to, if I understand very well the question, of course there are policies related to corruption. Of course it is in many countries, and the responsibility for statistical offices and the system against corruption is to support these politics. I mean, it's a very, very quick and normal process. If you allow me to thank to Norway in order to close the meeting, we are on time. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks for coming. I would just to say two things. Of course, saying thanks to Norway. First, corruption is a very important topic. It's part of a very comprehensive agenda of development. It's not isolated issue. It is a very, very important part of this. And of course, as we said since the beginning, it must be a continuous process, because it is not just corruption is not a question just of government. It's a question of some civil society, of course, for the government, but the private sector, social sector, and every field of development is involved in one way or another in these kind of topics: justice, education, health, everything, even international trade and so on. And second one is that the statisticians, we have a very important opportunity and responsibility in measuring corruption. we coordinate the national statistical system. So we have to be the institutions that we provoke inside the countries for measuring. It is, the normal thing is that countries, they don't like to measure by themselves, dealing with corruption. They like to do measurements of many other things, but not about corruption. It's a very difficult issue. So statistical offices, we have very important instruments like cooperation, international cooperation, as we see here. We have statistical frameworks. We have SDGs indicators. So we have a lot of the support of institutions like UNODC, for example. This is very important. We have the instruments in order to be the institutions that provoke to measure corruption inside our country. So thank you everyone again for being here, and let's continue the work for this very important part. Thank you very much.
You're practically on time, which I think is impressive for such a rich topic. We could have spent the whole day here, I think, but I would really encourage everyone who's here to reach out to UNSD, reach out to UNODC if you want to collaborate on this going forward. The collaboration point is I think it's essential. Here we have the entry point both from the anti-corruption agency side and from the National Statistical Office's side, which is valuable. And I think take also Sarah's point on the inclusiveness and maybe being a bit brave in embracing citizen-generated data as well. So a lot of opportunities, and hopefully it will move forward. So thank you. Have a very good day of statistics. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Very rich presentation.
We can take breakfast on your behalf. Yeah.
Ganske precis. Tusen takk. Det